media and the elections. We are doing so also against the backdrop of the unprecedented threat to the media by the government spokesman, George Charamba. And we want to say clearly that doesn't all go well. For the process towards elections. That is a lame threat, and that neither the journalists in this country nor the journalists out there will accept that lying down. So we enter the discussion today with among the top media persons before us, including a young man from CCC or Stalos, Siziba, and I'll leave Tony Rila to introduce the panel. The series, as you know, is being held by SAPES Trust, Policy Dialogue in conjunction with RAO, Research and Advocacy Unit, of which Tony is a senior researcher there. So Tony, I hand over to you.
Thanks very, very much, Ibo. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this. I think it probably might be the 9th in the series of the dialogues looking at elections. And as Ibo said, we have a very, very important panel here. Zenzele Ndebele from SAITI, who's a well-known media activist and activist in his own right. Astara Siziba from CCC, the deputy spokesman of the CCC, and to talk very much about how they're experiencing this election. And finally, Dumisani Morea, who is former editor of The Independent and renowned journalist in his own right. Dumi is currently stuck in traffic in Johannesburg. And so welcome. It's obviously difficult at this time. Both North and South and Limpopo are experiencing power cuts, so there are often difficulties with these webinars. As Ibo pointed out, this has been a series basically doing an audit of Zimbabwe's readiness for elections. And it was framed very usefully for us in the very first of the series by Dr. Zamchia, who analyzed the readiness for elections around 5 pillars. And we're talking about one of them, and I'll come back to that in a minute. He talked about inclusion, the ability of citizens to register and vote, that nobody's left behind. It's open, everybody needs to participate. He talked about insulation. He talked about, and in that he was talking about the ability of citizens to be protected, that there's no intimidation, patronage, clientelism, political violence. We talked about integrity and the very important processes that go around the performance of the electoral authority. And here we had 2 very important webinars on delimitation and the contrast between Kenya and Zimbabwe, how Kenyans have done it and how Zimbabweans are not doing it. And then finally, we talked about irreversibility, which is essentially the pillar where if the election meets all the criteria of best practice, then candidates and losing parties accept the result. And if there's dispute, that courts deal with the matter in a non-partisan, independent fashion. Now, it's fair to say in the webinars to date, the overwhelming perspective given by most of the speakers and discussants, and some of them have been very, very eminent indeed, have been very pessimistic about Zimbabwe meeting best practice and regional, continental, and international standards. But that's the background. But tonight we're talking about information. And this is where, in a sense, the rubber hits the road on elections. This is about the actual participation by citizens in understanding who they wish to elect, who's available to be elected, what policies they offer, what they carried out in the past parliamentary process, were they good MPs or bad MPs? It's a very fundamental part of democracy. And we approach this in two ways. One is to do with information in the narrow sense. This is information about the press and media and the very important role that the press and media play in informing citizens about what the issues are, what the parties offer, access to information in all sorts of ways. This frames the informational package that a citizen needs to decide how to cast his or her vote. But it's also not just the top-down process of being provided information, it's about the active process of citizens being able to engage, as I said, with the candidates, with the parties, to be able to go from one party political meeting to another in their constituency or in their ward and listen to what the candidate has on offer. Does the candidate have something that makes sense to the people within their constituency or within their ward? Has the candidate performed adequately in the past? To be able to ask candidates hard questions like, you came here 5 years ago and you promised all these things, and we never saw you ever again until now. And it's that particular process that allows a person to say, for example, well, I had a Tory candidate for the last 5 years. I never saw him. He never did anything. And I think he's useless. And to go to a meeting of a Labour Party candidate and say, well, this guy speaks sense, or women speak sense, and I think I'm going to change my vote. So it's the balance between overall party support against the support for the individual citizen about how his interests are going to be looked after on the ground. So it's very important. So in what we're looking at here is firstly that the state media has to be non-partisan. This is a complaint that every observer mission, both domestic and international, has made for the last 23 years, is that the state media is partisan. They do not accord openness to ordinary individuals. And I'm sure the colleagues that on the platform are going to talk about it. It also relies on reliable, accurate reporting by the press media generally. There's a comment made in one of the webinars about Kenya and the complaints they had about, if you want, the free press and their affiliations, and just how partisan they were, and how often they were inaccurate, and how often they were fostering hate speech. And particular hate speech is a very important aspect of it. As I said, the ability of citizens to freely get information, the basic rights of citizens, freedom of information, freedom of association, etc., to go to meetings, to go to rallies. And the corollary of that is candidates being open to the public generally, that they need to not discriminate against people coming to their meetings and asking them tough questions. And fundamentally, in this process, and as Ibo has made this repeatedly, this is a process in which people are, you treat each other as opponents. You're competing for political power as opponents, knowing that you might win this time or you might lose, and you might win next time or you might lose. They're not enemies. And as Ibo has pointed out repeatedly, this is one of the few countries in the whole SADC region in which opposition political parties are treated as enemies. And this speaks to something that was raised by one of the speakers last week at a SAPES launch of a book on populism, where the point about mutual toleration is a critical aspect of democracy. The idea, and this goes to the heart of the idea, that you treat people as opponents, because if you don't, and you treat them as enemies, you're very likely to be treated as an enemy if you lose and they go to power and they get into power. Then you have this problem of politics becoming a hostile, aggressive, often violent process. So with those preliminary remarks, I'd now like to move to the first speaker. Senzele, I don't think needs much introduction, at least in Zimbabwe. He's a very eminent commentator on Zimbabwe, producing a very, very vibrant platform of commentary from down south. And it's a pleasure to have somebody from down south of the country to be talking to us this evening. So sincerely, about 30 minutes or more would be great. And may I hand over to you. Evening.
Thank you very much, Tony, and good evening, everyone. Like we are in Zimbabwe, so I'm hoping that electricity will not go while I'm talking. And for that reason, I'll try to be as brief as possible so that I also give others an opportunity before election disappears. I'm going to talk about the issue of freedom of our speech or freedom of press, whether generally the public is free, is there freedom of expression, how is the media performing in Zimbabwe? And I think for everyone, when you talk about Zimbabwe, and you can talk about Zimbabwe and freedom of the press or freedom of expression in the same sentence, because it has never been the case since 1980. So I usually like to give a historical background, and I find similarities between the early 80s and the current situation, because for two reasons. And the first one is that in the early 80s, when everyone was happy about independence and everything, back then there were quite a few number of civil society organizations that were operating, or like we have now. Probably we didn't have the same numbers as the ones that we have now. And the main voice at that particular time was journalists. And you remember that during that time also the journalists were mainly foreign correspondents, because our media was dominated by state media, the Zim papers and ZBC. And while everyone was celebrating independence, we all know that the people of Matebeleland were being killed. And the only people who could talk about it were the journalists. And what is interesting is that during that time, the government actually threatened journalists. They called others Selu Scouts, threatened to deport others, and all sorts. They even went on false tours with them, misleading them, and all those kind of things. The main idea was to make sure that they closed the only voice which was there, to make sure that the journalists did not do their job of informing. And we've seen that trend throughout the early 80s, during 2000, there was always that during the Mugabe's time. And in 2017, everyone hoped that things would change, and we had somehow seen journalists, the mushrooming of online, private media, quite a number of, the licensing of community radio stations and all that. And everyone thought that things were now different. But over the last few years, we have seen a different trend. About a year or two ago, we did a documentary site on media capture, where we're looking at how journalism is now being bought and put a price, how media organizations were being bought by the state, or those linked to the state, being captured in various forms. And that has continued. And the question that you should ask yourself now is, do we really have the journalists that we can, or we do have journalists, but do we have press freedom? Are journalists free to do their work? Because what is different between now and Mugabe's time is that during Mugabe's time, you knew that the law and order police were going to come after you and arrest you and charge you with something. But nowadays, the strategy is to find an offense for you and send you to jail. And the threats by Charamba are not isolated. And he, at least he said it publicly, and he said something that everyone knows, that this government is capable of doing that. So those things don't, or those threats don't affect journalists only. They even affect an ordinary person who's on Twitter, who's on Facebook, who's on WhatsApp. And on various WhatsApp groups that I am on, and friends on Facebook, I've seen that people are now careful on how they actually talk or tweet or send messages, because people are aware that, by the way, at the end of the day, I might be arrested, and you don't need to be charged. You can still be arrested, and then 2 years or 5 months down the line, you'll be released without any serious offense, but will have spent time in prison, and it would have inconvenienced you. Well, I'm not sure of the rest of the country, but one thing that I know for sure is that the people of Matabeleland are still up to date. They're traumatized by Gukuraundi, and they're very scared. And aside when we usually go out and try to do vox pops, people ask you, so what are you going to do with my voice? Am I not going to be arrested? Are you going to cover my face? What are you going, even when you go to a meeting and you ask people to fill a register, people ask you, what will happen to our names? Am I safe if I write my ID? So there is a lot of fear. And that fear is not going to go down, and we are going towards elections. So what makes it so scary is that the PVO bill has, in my own world or in my own opinion, has buried civil society. When was the last time you saw a very powerful statement from civil society condemning anything that is happening in Zimbabwe, be it voter registration, be it the ZANU-PF primary elections, be it journalists being threatened? And everyone is now worried that if I say something, then if the bill is passed into law, we might not be registered and all those. So the PVO bill has really served its purpose to make sure that it really closes out the space on civil society. It makes the civil society say, we see no evil and we hear no evil, and we will just be worried about our survival and the legal things that we can do in our community. And it's so worrying. So when the voice of civil society is gone, what is left is the media. And when media is threatened, and you know that when you are threatened, you are also going, yes, we might act brave and say, no, they're not going to do anything to us. We are going to continue. But we know that people are going to change the way they tweet. People are going to change the way they report their stories. There are other people that you never see being portrayed in bad light, because we fear that at night these comrades are going to come for us and then ask us, what were you saying on Twitter? So we might act brave on social media. We might act like we don't care. We do care, and we are scared. And we know what these guys can do. People who killed 20,000 people and nothing happened to them, and they're still in power today, you think that they will care about you. So they know that nothing will happen. So it is really worrying as we go towards elections that the space is shrinking. A lot would happen. A lot will happen. Violence will happen during elections. There will be, journalists are supposed to be the people who are fact-checking information. They're supposed to be the people who are pointing out that there is this candidate that you have put as your candidate, whether it's CCC or ZANU-PF. This person did A, B, C, D. In this environment, I don't see that happening. Journalists are the ones who are supposed to be providing information, not only journalists, and civil society as well, providing information on voter education. There was, just past few weeks, there was a voter registration blitz. I think there are very few civil society organizations, if any, who were monitoring that process. I never saw any press statement from any civil society organization actually condemning or encouraging ZEC or patting ZEC on the back on what was going on. But we know there were challenges. A lot of them. ZEC would run out of paper. ZEC would have issues with electricity. There were a lot of people who wanted to register and did not register for various reasons. Some did not have IDs. But those issues were ignored. Why? Because people are afraid. People now care about their registration more than anything else. And with this Al Jazeera documentary, the media is also now under the spotlight. And people are saying, I rather preserve what I have. I rather keep my, there are times when you ask yourself, but why should I play a hero when I have kids that are supposed to go to school and they need to pay fees? So why don't I just do my work in the little that I can and get a salary and go home and live happy ever after? So a lot is going to happen during this by-election, starting with the ZANU-PF elections. There's a lot that is happening, but you don't see it being reported because people watch and then people send you stories. The inboxes of journalists are full of so many scandals that are happening, and everyone is talking about primary elections, about FAS, about this and that. But who will dare talk about these issues? So my short presentation is that we seem to be redressing when it comes to the issues of freedom of speech, when it comes to the issues of the freedom of the media, freedom of civil society, the space in which people are operating. Yes, publicly, everything is going on. The government is licensing more players. Everyone is free to do what they want, but we know that is not the case. And my fear is a lot of stuff is going to happen during these elections and it will go unreported. I think I'll stop now, and I would like to thank Zesa for not disturbing my presentation.
Thank you, Zesa, and thank you, Sincerely. Sincerely, just a couple of points to unpack here. As I framed at the beginning, there's two bits of it, and I think you've gone over both of them. The first is obviously the reporting, and I think you've been talking about the closure of the civic space and in particular the effects on the media. So when it comes to elections, how are journalists feeling? And you've made the point about the partisan nature of the state press and media. How are journalists feeling about covering major political events, like, for example, the ZANU-PF primaries, or a meeting of the CCC, or a meeting of MDCT? How do they feel about going to those meetings and listening and, like good journalists, asking questions? How are journalists feeling about that in your experience?
Well, talking about the elections, covering elections is not always easy because you get attacked by people from both parties. It's not, when it comes to journalists being victims of violence, it's not only from ZANU-PF. We have had journalists who have been beaten up by opposition. We have had journalists being threatened by opposition members. So maybe people just love to cover, small parties like Chapman and ZAPU and Monzora, because they are not that big, so they will treat journalists differently compared to the bigger political parties. So someone said to me, I was talking to a friend, and says, the 2023 elections sound like a delayed match. I'm not sure what they really meant, but there is the excitement that normally comes with elections seems not there. I think people have conditioned themselves that there will be violence in this election. And we somehow think that a particular political party would want results to go their way, and they will make sure that the results go their way by any means necessary. And journalists in this election, they're supposed to play a bigger role. Like I've said, that with the closing of space and with the PVO bill, there will be less a voice from civil society, and the journalists would have to take up that voice. But the environment itself might hinder that, because journalists will fear being beaten up, being arrested. And I do hope that they will do their job in a more professional way, without fear or favor. And anyway, we know that journalism is a contact sport. So once in a while, you get bruised, and it's part and parcel of the job. But no one likes to be ruffled anyway. And no, I mean, as a journalist, I don't go around carrying I don't want to go around carrying an X so that I protect myself when I'm being attacked. But that has always been that during elections, especially with, unfortunately, it is junior reporters who end up being affected, and they don't want to go and cover elections. I can go to a rally and I'll see someone in ZANU-PF that I know, and they will shield me. I can go to a rally and I'll see Ostalos, and I'll be protected, and I won't have challenges because I've been around for a while and I know people from all political parties. But that's not the case with a young journalist who's just from college and they are still trying to cover elections. So this is why you find that many reporters are not interested in covering politics, because it is not a safe space. They always feel threatened, and anything can happen.
Thanks. I mean, that's important. So as you pointed out, and the world knows this, journalism is a contact sport. From Iraq through every single space. So what you're saying is that journalists in Zimbabwe feel threatened all the time. So now I want to extend that to the ordinary citizen, because the journalist takes this on as a job. This is what they do. They go and they find the news, and sometimes the places where they find the news are very ugly places indeed, war zones. And you're pointing out that the experienced journalists know how to navigate the space, how to go to a particular meeting, whether it's in this very polarized country between essentially ZANU-PF and Triple C, how to navigate their way into that. But those who don't have the savvy or the experience feel very vulnerable, and it's often dangerous. Now, think about the ordinary citizens. Okay, think about, as you said, the election climate is dull. There's no excitement about the elections. Some of the work that Rao's been doing suggests that, people think it's a non-event. But, Tony Real, a citizen, wants to know, in my constituency, who's the best candidate from? Now, I don't care about party politics. I'd like to go and listen to what both parties have to say to me. How does that citizen feel about doing that in Zimbabwe? Do they feel safe? Are they willing to do that? Will they be able to go and ask a difficult question of a candidate and say, well, you've been my constituency MP for the last 5 years. I haven't heard a single word from you in Parliament. I've never heard from you in my constituency. Why? Will citizens be comfortable to do that? Zinzeli, what's your comment?
Sorry, I missed something there. I didn't hear your last question.
Okay, all right. So, right. Nostaras, did you get the question? Don't let it preempt what you want to say. Nostaras?
Yes, I got the question.
Okay, but reserve it for after your comments. I mean, mostly, okay. You are a competing political party. You wish the people to hear what you offer, your policies, what as an MP I've done in the last 5 years, or as a candidate, what I will do better than the next candidate, and this is why you should vote for me. How's that working for you right now in the election? Oh, have we lost you? Nostaras?
Thank you very much. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you know that, Tony, we have just, first, let me thank you for inviting us. And SAPES Trust, one of the most crucial, think tanks in our country that has been doing very tremendous work. You know that one of the greatest challenges of our opponents is that this country has relegated to the periphery the role of intellectuals. And it is for that reason that you see that at the center of the crisis in our country is that we've got a ruling class without ruling ideas. So the lack of dominant ideas is also part and parcel why we have inconsistent policies, we have challenges, lack of interpretation of the Constitution, and a lot of challenges that we're facing like now, and lack of response from the state on the key national questions and today day-to-day struggles of ordinary people. I speak this in respect of the government's failure to respect and implement the Constitution in respect of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We as Triple C participated in the by-election last year, and one of the dominant issues, as you know, Tony and everyone here, that our major crisis was that Zimbabwe has been having elections without democracy. And at the center of that lack of democracy has been manipulation of the media as a key element to advance the agenda of one party, making Zimbabwe a de facto one-party state. A clear suspension of the Constitution is visible if you have been following elections in our country in respect to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. You saw, Tony, that we have also just announced publicly how our consensus candidate selection process is going to be going about. And we've emphasized that the philosophy guiding that selection process, we believe as Triple C with great respect and great humility that the selection process must produce at least the candidates that are born out of the collective view of ordinary people, not a situation that we've seen before where candidates just come from certain quarters without the mandate from the people. And when we talk about mandate, we are automatically talking about issues of capacity. You would agree with me, fellow Zimbabweans, that what we have witnessed and what we have seen in the past parliament is also lack of the necessary rigor to hold government to account. We have also seen that part of the challenge why the executive has been able to come up with a full-throated executive tyranny is because they've not been able to be held accountable sufficiently. So I have no doubt in my mind, we have no doubt as a movement that there are certain MPs that have done so much to enhance and pursue authoritarian pushback. But the regime has been able to run away unaccountable because of the quality of people that the citizens, that different political parties feel. And we have said we give an opportunity to citizens, to our members, but more importantly, stakeholders. When we talk about stakeholders, we're saying residents association, think tanks, community groups, associations, trade associations, civic society organizations, and different players to give an opinion in terms of the quality, in terms of the people that must be deployed in parliament, that must be deployed in parliament, in council, and of course, also the person to be deployed as the presidential candidate. Why we are doing this, we believe that we must be able to have candidates that reflect the collective aspirations of the people. And the people know that certain individuals have the necessary capacity, the skills, the ability to work with the people, the ability to advance the interests of the people, to be able to advance a people-centered agenda. We are to the center left as a movement. And one of the things that is important is to have people who can go in council, people who can go in parliament with that understanding of the ideological thrust, because it is that ideological thrust or the dominant political idea that must be able to inform our policies in council, inform our behavior and conduct in government, inform the kind of policies that we advance. Because what you see with Mthuli Ncube or ZANU-PF as it were, is confusion at the level of policies because there is no dominant idea. So as we go into the election, we have seen persecution happening. More than 46 of our rallies have been banned. You saw that we have not been given access to state media to be able to share, because elections with democracy means competition. Competition means free access to the media. We should be able to go if there is a national debate or a debate of national significance, say it's a question on land, or it's a question on sanctions, or it's a question on the recent revelations by Al Jazeera of how much money is being looted out of the country. Let ZBSC as a state institution be able to provide a platform for political parties to come and say their views. That is what works in a democracy. That is what the constitution, at least as a bare minimum, guides and demands for. So these are the challenges in the pre-election cycle. Of course, issues of violence, issues of the attempt to try and bar gatherings, politically motivated violence to demotivate our people, particularly in the countryside, is a big issue. So for us, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly has been suspended in this country. So the constitution has been suspended, and that's why you see all these things happening, because it's the issue of accountability that we see. That's why we frame the national question in and around questions of accountability and equity, because our people are impoverished. The looting that is happening in the plunder of natural resources is happening for the benefit. And I've said this to some of the people that you see who have attempted to try and chlorinate the regime out of this scandalous, corruption, documentary that has been revealed. I've argued that there are some half-baked intellectuals of the regime that have tried to justify the looting and saying, no, we are circumventing sanctions. That's why we are using all these routes to try and run away from sanctions. But I would say this, that the danger with that particular submission is that it is not only the dishonesty in the submission, but it is the naivety of those who think that these resources are being siphoned illegally out of the country for the benefit of the people. What you see on this gold scandal, and that's our position as Triple C, that money is being looted for the benefit of the few, not the men. It's only a few individuals that you have seen benefiting, not those that have been holding the state, not those that have been in the civic bureaucracy, but certain individuals that have got a bigger share of the loot for the benefit of their own individual pockets, and not just even for the benefit of those in ZANU. Because poverty in this country is across the political party. Majority of young people, whether in ZANU or in Triple C, wake up at the blessing of an empty stomach and a jobless existence. So what you see is the plunder of national resources, not for the benefit of a political party, not for the benefit of the state, but for the benefit of the few and never the men. Thank you.
Thank you, Astalis. You made a couple of points there that I think need a little bit of unpacking. I mean, if elections and, you know, in democracy, we talk about the hustings, you know, the discussions that happen before the election, how you can go to a meeting and you can see your MP and you can ask him questions and criticize him if he's done badly or compliment him if he's done well. How, in your view, are you able to communicate with the people? You're suggesting that, in fact, what has been going on is that you are unable to meet with the people to offer your views and your policies, etc., etc. You know, is that the case, that you're unable to meet the people in an open and transparent way? You raise the issues of freedom of assembly and association and of information. Is that the case that you're experiencing right now in this election?
Of course, you know that, Tony, we have been attempting to do meetings, particularly in the countryside. There has been a facade that has been created to try and say, no, Triple C is being allowed. We've only been able to do internal party meetings that do not need more power, clearance. But any meeting that we've attempted to do that is public, particularly in the countryside, because as we get into the shadows of the election, what is proving that ZANU wants to have an election without democracy is visibly by, number one, the intention to try and lock rural areas as a no-go area for the alternative. We have seen that our applications to hold meetings, particularly in the countryside, have not been given approval by the police, and we've argued that the police is constitutionally mandated to maintain law and order, not to be used as a weapon against those that differ with ZANU-PF, because ZANU is not going to be in government forever. And the police is a state institution that must be able to pay its allegiance to the Constitution, as their motto says. So you have seen that where we've attempted to have meetings in the countryside, what has proven that the conversations and the narrative that the rural areas must be no-go area for us has been proven by lack of approval of our meetings, whether they are rallies, whether they are, private party meetings. You know, our people were tortured in Murewa for holding a party meeting, and cowpits were recorded on daylight, and nothing has happened to those. We went to Kwekwe to have a rally when the president was speaking in the podium. ZANU-PF, armed with matches, came and disrupted our program, and in that day, we even lost one of our compatriots, may he rest in power. So that is the kind of condition around which we are having elections on. And the danger is not just the bastardization or infringement of our right to assembly, but it is the deterrent effect that happens to those that will be attempting or wanting to go to future meetings of our organization. So it's a deterrent measure that is used to scare our people. But thank God Zimbabweans are
You're breaking up there, Ostalis.
They've defied the odds against all difficulty to hold the socialist movement. Yes, I'm here.
So, Ostalis, I'm interested that you're saying that, because my impression as an observer is this is very different to both 2018 and 2019, when I think CCC in its previous incarnations was able to hold meetings and rallies widely right around the country. Does this represent a change for this election? Is this different? Seems to me that this feels much more like earlier elections, like 2005 or 2008. In the first round, there clearly was a lot of process, but there wasn't in 2000 and 2002. So, sincerely, we're talking about being history. So is this a change from the last few elections, apart from the violence of the presidential rerun in 2008?
Of course, I think that is informed by the reality that the new dispensation attempted, Tony, and successfully failed to do so, to create an image of a competitive authoritarian regime. And you know that competitive authoritarian regime attempts to open some space within election. That's why you saw that there was relative tranquility. And the regime realizing, if you remember, that they'd lost the election after opening some of the space, it led to the blatant killing with live bullets of people in Harare and different parts of the country. And what you see now is the regime moving from its competitive authoritarian regime mood to a full-born authoritarian regime. That's why you see that all the narrative of an open society, all the narrative of a democratic country and bearing allegiance to the constitution has been shut down. You saw that just this afternoon, a presidential spokesperson saying to one of our youth activists, Makombra Ruzivisha, that don't you remember that we abducted you? We even send people to rape you and we can locate you where you are. So you can see the brazeness, you can see the crudeness as we enter into the mood that we are under a full-blown authoritarian situation and authoritarian regime ahead of these elections. And like Zenzele would say, it is obvious for everyone that possibilities of violence as we go into elections is going to be increasing.
Thank you. Thanks. Our third speaker seems still to be stuck in the traffic in Johannesburg. Those of you who know the road between Pretoria and Johannesburg will know how terrible it can be, and particularly, I guess, during times of power cuts. We've raised a lot of issues here. I'm particularly interested in the experience of citizens, because as I said at the beginning, one of the things that's important is elections are a bit like going shopping. You want to decide which product is best. This is a very bad example, I'm sure, but nonetheless, that's what it is. And so the citizen view is incredibly important in this. Are we able to go out and get the information that we need? I see Zenzele's in there. Zenzele, did you want to come in?
Not much, but I think what I would say is actually, I mean, I agree with Ostalos on a number of things that, a lot of people, I think even those in civil society, had high hopes that things had changed from the Mugabe regime and it was going to be better. And of course, there was semblance of that change, especially when you look at the media, how in 2017, 2018, people were like, being able to say a lot of things. There was the opening of community radio stations and all those kind of things. So you conclude that this government is okay to do certain things as long as they don't feel threatened. And when they feel like they're about to lose their power, they go to default mode, which is violence. And sometimes I think we underestimate the experience that ZANU has had in maintaining power and how they've dealt with so many regimes and so many characters. Their history dates back to 1963. You know, their shenanigans and their violence with against ZAPU and fighting for dominance, fighting against the colonial regime. Coming back in 1980, bringing all the structures and the tactics of the colonial regime into their fold. The 1987 Unit Accord, bringing the ZAPU elements in them. So they have a huge history of knowing how to deal with the opposition. And they've always used the tactic, kill one, frighten 1,000. And that is going to work, whether it is civilians, whether it's the people in ZANU itself, or it is the journalists. Their default mode is violence.
Okay, so I'm kind of trying to unpack this. We were expecting another input there, as I said, from Dumisani, but I'm very interested in the citizen. Yeah, okay. And we've got two pictures coming out here. Sinzeli, you're saying the election looks really dull. I mean, it's not grabbing people, okay? And I understand that 1 in 5 youth haven't got registered, and that may be because they find it very difficult to get registered, but it also may mean that they have no faith left in the political process or the political parties. I mean, what's the point? It's a rigged game, whatever happens. So the most important part of elections is the citizens. So I'm looking for your insights as, on one hand, a member of a political party who's engaging the citizens, and you, a journalist who's looking and engaging with the citizens. Where are the citizens? What are the citizens feeling about this election? You know, the information that's available, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I noticed, for example, that Al Jazeera has just released its next episode. So that explains why nobody wants to think about elections and citizens, but they want to listen to the latest gossip. Is that where we've got, that we're so disconnected with citizens from political processes that elections are no longer an event that engages us? Any views on that, Sinzele? And then I'd like to go to you, Astalis, about that too.
Well, I will not pretend to speak on behalf of the citizens, but I think people have different views and they feel differently. And you already mentioned some of the things that young people are asking themselves, that we're going to have the elections, then what? Because if the elections, you know, if everyone says, okay, we're going to vote and then the elections are rigged, so what do we do? And, you know, over the years, and people, when you look at you gave an example of the Al Jazeera documentary, that people will know that at the end of the day, if ZANU-PF itself does not do anything about those allegations and what is being alleged in the documentary, nothing will happen. We'll complain for the next 2 weeks, tweet about it, trend. The next time we're turning it into jokes. The next time we move on to another scandal. And I don't think this documentary will be an agenda when it's election time. No one would say, no, let's not vote for this, let's not vote for that. It will be something that is on the media, we consume it, and we go back to our normal lives. So citizens, I think most of them are really are tired, because they are the victims of the elections. And they've seen that over the years, elections have not brought whatever they thought it was going. So the question sometimes that people ask themselves is the election the avenue to bring the change that people want, or it causes more problems for them? Because in the rural areas, when it's election time, then you know that violence is going to come. You now need to when it's election time in Zimbabwe, a lot of things stop. A lot of things are suspended. You can't do this, you can't do that. There are no go areas. And they bring more trauma and hatred and more pain to people than really the joy of electing someone who's going to represent you, because it's at the end of the day, very few things change. So maybe this time people ask themselves that do elections really bring the change?
Thank you. I think that was a very good view from a citizen, which I think most of the academic research kind of supports you, is that the truth is that Zimbabweans have very little political trust in the state or political parties, and that's been going on since 1999. And elections don't provide the kind of solution. In fact, what you're saying is that they're a kind of ritual, and often a very frightening ritual. I seem to have lost Ostalis. Ostalis, are you there? You seem to have got cut out. Okay. So not to beat Zenzeli over the citizens, I'm very interested to get some reaction from the floor here, from citizens, about how they're feeling about the election and the engaging with the political parties and how they feel about participation in elections. Is this the kind of process that you would expect of a good democracy, that this is a shopping between different political opponents to see who would best represent you? So if you've got any comments, I'd be very interested in them. Please go to the button at the bottom of your door there that said of the page, and look for reactions. Sorry, I left my video off. So put your hand up if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to start asking some blunt questions. And unfortunately, poor old Zenzeli is all on his own, so I don't really want to aim it at him. I want people to come in, please. Any comments here? Hasu, Greg Powell, Ishinesu, who else? Any comments, folks? Okay, deathly silence. Okay, I'm sorry we seem to have lost Ostaris, because it really was a question we wanted to put to him, which was basically about if the position conveyed today, both by him and Zenzeli, about this election, and that it looks so grim and so one-sided, why does the CCC think that they have a chance at all of winning this election? Unfortunately, I can't find Ostalis to answer that, but maybe some people from the floor would be willing to comment on this. Anybody from Rao? Anybody from the floor? Nebo, maybe I can bring you in at this particular point.
No, I'd rather not. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, sorry, folks. When you lose two of the speakers, it gets very difficult indeed. At this point, let me take some guidance from Ivo. It seems to me we've been going for about an hour. I'm not sure we're going to get much more out of this, and Zeli has done a very good job of portraying both the media problems. Ostalis has talked about some of the citizens' problems, and Zenzeli has talked about, again, some of the citizens' problems and their reluctance to be involved in elections. Shall I, at this particular point, hand back to you, and I'll thank, and you can thank the speakers, and we'll close early?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
That's the
right,
feeling of the House.
Right. If the House is happy, that's it on information. I think that I'm sorry we didn't get the detailed discussion of this, because, you know, as I said at the beginning, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is when citizens get very excited. In every election all over the world, this is when people are going and they're asking questions of candidates, they're going to different meetings, they're trying to decide who's going to be the best person. I think that what we experience in Zimbabwe is this complete inertia, the sense of fatalism about elections. I think, as Zenzeli put it, that in fact there is a sense in which elections are non-events, scary, and they don't solve the particular problems. So, Zenzeli, thank you very much. Ostalis, if you're still somewhere around, thank you. Dumisani, I'm sorry you couldn't join us. Ivo, back to you.
Thanks very much. Well, please, we do. Thank you, Tony, for trying to make the best of a very difficult situation today, in which one panelist didn't appear at all, and the others disappeared prematurely. But thanks very much. We look forward to the next one. The next one is really on the Al Jazeera issue. We'll be looking at it on the 20th of April, analyzing it with experts from the region, and hopefully from Al Jazeera itself on the panel, looking at it and in terms of the implications for the economy and political implications, of course. What is the reaction of the population, of the citizenry, to this drama, which for some of us confirms what we have known for many years. So see you on the 20th on the panel. We'll keep you informed. Thank you and bye-bye.